This broke in the USA Today via NBC News polling. Joe Biden falls behind Donald Trump with young voters, a key group, ahead of 2024, poll says. President Joe Biden is trailing former President Donald Trump in a hypothetical general election matchup among young voters, an NBC News poll released Sunday found. Among voters aged 18 to 34, Biden saw 42% support. That's compared to Trump, who led him with 46% support. The poll is an early warning for Biden's campaign ahead of the 2024 presidential election that young voters could be peeling away from him. They were a key voting bloc essential to Biden's victory in the 2020 election. An exit poll from NBC News in 2020 found Biden won voters 18 to 29 by more than 20 points. So you're looking at almost a 30-point swing amongst young voters who are the most reliably Democratic voters in the entire country. Trump's lead among this group, however, was within the subgroup's margin of error in the poll at plus or minus 6.2 percentage points. That's irrelevant because even if they're tied, that's a disaster for Joe Biden. Right. In a hypothetical general election matchup from NBC News with voters of all ages, Biden trailed Trump by a small margin of 2 percentage points. Trump led with 46, while Biden fell behind at 44. That doesn't seem all that significant on its own since Trump has been ahead in the average of polls recently, but this is the first NBC News poll in which Trump has led. So it's the first poll done by this outfit that has had Trump in the lead nationwide amongst every cohort. Biden, or amongst the aggregate of all cohorts, I should say. Biden also saw one of his lowest approval ratings ever since taking the presidency at 40%, according to the poll. 57% of voters say they disapprove of his presidency. As the Israel-Hamas war continues, 62% of the poll's respondents, including 30% of Democrats, disapproved of Biden's handling of foreign policy in general. With regard to the Israel-Hamas war, 56% of voters said they disapprove of Biden's handling of the war. The poll found that Democrats are split over the war, with a slim majority of them, 51%, say they believe Israel's military response to Hamas has gone too far, compared to 27% who said Israel's response is justified, margin of error plus or minus 3.1. So once again, unprecedented collapse in support for Joe Biden. We saw it a couple weeks ago where Arab voters jumped ship. 83% of Arab voters, 83% say they're not voting for Joe Biden. We've seen Latinos turn on Joe Biden to the point where that's a dead heat. We've seen black voters turn on Joe Biden to the point where now over 20% say they're voting Trump, not just not voting at all, but voting Trump. And now the latest cohort to peel off, which was predictable if you followed the sentiments after October 7th and the Israel war, young voters. So the bottom is just really, it has fallen out. It has fallen out. These two coalitions, Arab voters and young voters, these were the two coalitions that you can't afford to have every coalition peel off. He was already going into 2024 facing enough headwinds, and this is just the latest.
I mean, at this point, there are rumors that they're going to take some of the money that has been collectively stolen by the Biden family and use it to pay off everyone's student debt. So I'm not sure if that's going to come through. They're looking into the campaign finance implications, whether that violates buying votes if he does that. This has parallels to what we're going to cover later with Argentina, actually, because a big part of the coalition that put Bumblebee Man from The Simpsons in office there were young voters. With Biden, it seems very similar because young people, because this guy in Argentina is anti-abortion. Most Argentinians don't agree with that. But when your coalition hates you that much, the other guy starts to look like, well, fuck it. Why not? Things are this bad. They can't afford a home. In the end, they're looking at the pre-Biden economy. And whether Trump deserves credit for it and whether it was all that great, that's something we can litigate. But the perception is, well, you know what? You could afford a house under Trump. You can't afford a house under Biden. And that is probably a big oversimplification, although I will say this. If Trump had been in office, would he have let Powell raise interest rates to this point, or would he have fired him because he understands where his bread is buttered and what that's going to do to his standing with voters? Right. I think there's a sense that in the end, Trump would not have allowed this to go on. Now, would that create runaway inflation if you didn't do it? I don't know. And in spite of what economists tell you, nobody fucking knows. Nobody really knows. The economics is like the weather. That you ask 10 of these guys, they have 10 different opinions. But there's no doubt in my mind that Trump would not have allowed it. He would have fired Powell before he would have allowed him to raise interest rates to that point. So I think there's a perception that, hey, even if I don't agree with Trump on certain cultural things, I'm just not going to vote for Joe Biden. I have somebody here I don't really like on a cultural and foreign policy level anyway. So why not go for one who might make a better economy for me?
Yeah, and also I think there's just really widespread disillusionment with Biden and with the Democratic Party overall. I think a lot of these young people who may have come out and joined some of the bullshit protests against Trump, like the Russiagate protests or the Women's March protests or the science and the climate march. All of a sudden, they cared about science and the environment when Trump was president, right? I think a lot of them realize, hey, those same liberals are not out in the streets with us for the Free Palestine protests. I mean, some of them are, but not nearly in the same numbers. It's a different crowd. You've been to the Palestine protests. You know it's a different crowd. I've been there, too. You don't have those milquetoast shit libs there.
It's not the cowbell people.
Yeah, it's not the cowbell people. It's not to say there aren't some mainstream liberals who are against Israel here. There are. Obviously, polling does show that. And so I'm not saying none of them are there. But it's not the same. It's not the same. The vibe is completely different at these Free Palestine marches from at, say, the Trump arraignment or the Women's March.
I was just going to say it. The Trump arraignment, I mean, the cowbell people aside, just the general liberals who were there. Right. You don't see those people at these Palestine rallies at all.
Please clap.